Teaching theories are provided to teachers as a direct influence of their perception, beliefs, and behaviours in the classroom. Over time, there have been various advances in these theories surrounding the most appropriate and efficient way for teachers to teach in schools, and more specifically in physical education and health classes. One of the most significant theories to emerge was that of Muska Mostyn, who developed Mostyn's spectrum of teaching styles, which is what I will be covering in today's seminar. This spectrum has been implemented by teachers into lesson plans and classrooms across the globe since the 1960s, when he first introduced it to the physical education teacher education programs at universities. Mostyn states that the fundamental issue in teaching is not which teaching style is better or best, but rather which style is most appropriate for reaching the objectives of a given lesson. It was this concept that led to his development of the first edition of the Spectrum of Teaching. Over the past 4 decades, the spectrum of teaching styles has commonly been referred to as things like a framework, model, and structure. However, some scholars prefer to call it or refer to it as a guiding tool or a set of tools that have become vital in many of the teachers' daily routines. These tools provide teachers with a variety of teaching styles in which they can select from for individual lesson plans. The spectrum itself follows the concept that no one style is better or worse than the other. Rather, one is more or less appropriate than the other, given the differences in context, purpose, and the learners involved. And since the first edition of the spectrum was developed, the differing styles have continuously been refined and modified, expanding from the original 8 to the 11 that there now are. Because there is such an extensive range of teaching styles that this theory covers, its implementation has been incorporated into health and PE lessons throughout primary to tertiary level. However, for the purpose of this project, I will be referring to secondary school contexts. As mentioned earlier, Muska Mostyn is the pioneer theorist of the spectrum of teaching. He worked extensively over his lifetime to develop and refine the theory until his passing in 1994. Since then, one of his colleagues, Sarah Ashworth, has taken over his role and has furthered his quest to refine the theory by presenting workshops on the spectrum across the globe. The constant refinement in the spectrum has resulted in it now comprising 11 different teaching styles labelled A through K. These 11 teaching styles aim to benefit a variety of different educational goals while also assisting the teacher to meet the needs and interests of individual students. As each student does not learn the same way or have the same motivations, this spectrum allows the teacher to constantly modify their instruction and curriculum to cater for this. As the learners move through the spectrum from style A to K, the styles become less teacher-directed and increasingly student-directed. So, in general, styles A through E focus on the replication of information in schools, while styles F through K focus on the production of information and skills. This is a visual diagram of the structure of the spectrum. As you can see, styles A through K are all divided into equal portions. This signifies the fact that no one teaching style is better than the rest. The yellow portion of the diagram signifies teacher-directed learning. So style A at the bottom has the most amount of teacher-directed learning, whereas style K at the top has the least amount of teacher-directed learning, and vice versa. So style K has the most student-directed learning, whereas style A has very minimal student-directed learning. In addition to being labelled A through K, each teaching style also has a title. So as you can see, style A is called Command, style B is called Practice, and so on. And the names of these teaching styles give some direction as to what each teaching style incorporates itself. So for example, the Command teaching style is where a teacher demonstrates a skill in distinct parts in the correct way for it to be performed, and then the students follow the direction of the teacher's model. At the other end of the spectrum, self-teaching is where the students decide everything that they want to learn within the learning process. That is, that they pick the subject that they decide. They pick what they want to learn within that subject, and the teacher has little involvement and is only involved when the student asks him or her. So in addition to those 11 styles of teaching that you just saw, the concept of OTLO is also important. So where OTLO stands for objectives, teaching behaviour, learning behaviour, and outcomes. The spectrum relies quite heavily on the concept of OTLO, and it is within this concept where students are able to not only develop the physical skills or their motor skills, but also work on their cognitive, social, emotional, and moral and ethical qualities as well, or working with other people. So put simply, OTLO is basically the concept that objectives and outcomes of a given lesson plan rely heavily on the subject matter and behavioural context. So subject matter is the task being performed, and the example I've used is the students learning how to serve in tennis, and the behavioural context is the actions of the learner, so whether they're cooperating with their peers, completing an honest self-assessment, have positive interpersonal skills, etc. When both the subject matter and behavioural context are being used positively or incorporated positively, it then also has a positive impact on the outcomes and the meeting of the objectives in the given lesson plan, overall contributing to the holistic approach of the spectrum of teaching styles. To understand the spectrum better, I've provided some examples for each level of the spectrum from A to I. Styles J and K don't have any examples because they're so student directed that really there can't be any examples. All of these examples follow a health theme, incorporating muscular endurance, flexibility, and cardiovascular systems. In the command style, we have the example of the teacher instructing and demonstrating to the students how to take their pulse and calculate their heart rate zone. From there, the teacher is able to let the students go off and practice the skill themselves and provide feedback and direction when needed. In the practice style, the teacher is able to form multiple activity stations where the students perform various flexibility tasks. From there, the teacher demonstrates and describes each task, and then the students rotate around each station practicing each of the skills, again getting feedback when needed. In the reciprocal style, the teacher demonstrates a weightlifting technique, i.e. a bench press, and in pairs one student performs exercise while the other student watches and gives advice on their technique. The students then swap roles, and once the skill has been learned, they move on to a new exercise. In the self-check style, the teacher designs a self-monitoring chart to show food intake for a week. Using online resources, each student is to determine how much of each group of food they should be consuming before they keep track of their food intake for the week. For style E, or inclusion, the students determine their 1 RM, or their 1 rep max, for a variety of different weightlifting exercises and write down a goal of improvement for each. Using a chart provided by the teacher, students begin to improve their abilities by starting off their weight program at the appropriate level of the chart. Guided discovery. In this style, students are given a sheet with a list of questions relating to body composition. In one column, the answers to the questions are written as well. In groups, the students then work together and discuss which answer best suits each question. In style G, or convergent discovery, the teacher introduces different static stretches to the students, explaining their benefit and the target muscles. After the students have had the opportunity to test each stretch, the teacher asks scenario-based questions where there is only one single correct answer. So an example is, a runner gets sore muscles in her upper legs, which stretch would help her? In divergent production or discovery, the teacher asks general questions of the class to do with health and well-being, i.e. what are some benefits of having good muscle strength? As individuals or in groups, they work to brainstorm a variety of ideas and then discuss each of these ideas. And finally, in Style A, or the Learner's Individual Design Program, after they have learnt extensively about the cardiovascular system, students design their own personal training program, individually selecting daily exercises in for over a specific time period in order for them to reach their fitness goals. These examples are merely some of the thousands of different ways that all of these styles can be incorporated into lesson plans. And there are many resources available for teachers to utilize if they need further examples of how to integrate all these teaching styles into their lesson plans. As I previously mentioned, the spectrum has undergone significant refinement since its introduction into the health and PE curriculum back in the 1960s. These refinements have been integral to the way that the spectrum works in benefit of the learners and the teachers. One of the most notable changes of the spectrum was its shift from a versus to non-versus approach of teaching. A non-versus approach is where no one teaching or learning method is considered better than another. It was this change in the spectrum that led to the increase in its ability to meet the needs of individual students by making the student the most integral factor in the learning process, and also allowing the teachers to reach out to all students and focus on their individual needs. This change also led to the spectrum being viewed as equal portions, as I showed you earlier, whereas in the past it was viewed in a triangle format or in a hierarchical view where at the top was the student-directed learning and at the bottom was the teacher-directed learning, and that portrayed that at the top was where all the students needed to be and at the bottom was where they should be moving away from. However, Mostyn recognised that some students worked better at the bottom and some students worked at the top, and that some lessons required the teacher to use the teaching styles placed at the bottom and vice versa. This change has resulted in the spectrum reaching one of its most beneficial outcomes of how teachers can teach. In order to assess the benefits of the spectrum, it has been extensively researched by various scholars over time. The vast amount of literature supports the overarching principles and implementation of the theory in classroom, and some scholars explain it to be good educational practice due to its capability of catering to the diversity of students, or the diversity in the needs of students, its ability to meet various PE and health curriculum objectives, and its coherent, comprehensive, universal, practical, and integrated framework, and the many options it gives for teaching and learning. The benefits of the spectrum are supported by the results of various contextual setting studies. A recent study by Lee and Kim revealed that students experience the extrinsic benefits of the utilization of the spectrum quite well. That is, students were able to expand on not only their physical skills but their socialization, responsibility, interpersonal, and leadership skills. Comments made to the researcher followed the idea that lessons were more meaningful than if they'd just learnt the motor skill itself. In addition, a study conducted by Boyce also supports the benefit of the motor skill side of the spectrum. Boyce was able to determine a significant increase in the motor skill ability of the students, showing approximately 20% increases in acquisition and retention of the skills across the 3 teaching styles he tested, in comparison to their pre-test performances of the participants. This proves that in a contextual environment, the spectrum has extreme benefits. While it is clear there are a vast amount of benefits of the spectrum, it is also important to note that there are concerns as well. One of the key issues with the spectrum is that some of the earlier learning styles have been regarded as boring, repetitive with difficult content, and serious by students. This is an important pedagogical implication for teachers to consider when utilising these styles, as it requires them to think outside of the box and provide a lesson plan that teaches the motor skills but also creates a fun atmosphere where the students have the ability to learn the motor skill. Another concern of the spectrum is that teachers often do not know which style is the most appropriate style to incorporate in their lesson plan for either the content or the context or the type of learner that they're trying to utilise. Teachers often get stuck using the initial teaching styles from A to D, as these are regarded as easier to use or implement in teaching lessons, whereas styles in the latter half of the spectrum are often regarded as harder to use. The concern then doesn't actually involve the structure of the spectrum, but involves the pedagogical ability of the teachers, and I think with further education, these concerns can be overcome. Finally, to recap on the spectrum and what we've discussed today, it is important to note that many scholars have claimed the spectrum to be one of the most significant advances in health and PE classes in recent history. The 11 styles of teaching are constantly being refined to ensure that the classes that teachers are running are of most benefit to the teachers when they are utilising the spectrum. And while there are some concerns surrounding the spectrum, through adequate education, all these concerns are able to be overcome. And lastly, the spectrum of teaching styles has ultimately been researched in a positive light, not only allowing for the development of motor skills and movement knowledge, but also allowing students to develop in terms of their social, emotional, moral, and ethical attribute. These skills not only contribute to their personal growth, but also contribute to the development of the students within and outside the classroom setting. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my presentation today, and the following slide contains references of where I found my information. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my presentation today, and the following slide contains references of where I found my information for further reference.